It's the postseason, and we're still talking about the Mets because they are still doing weird stuff. All of the wild card series were sweeps. We say goodbye to the teams that are done, and a preview of the division series, including what could be the best division series ever. That's what we've got for you today on the Bandwagon. This is The Bandwagon, a podcast about baseball and the best division series ever. I'm Hannah Keyser, a baseball writer at Yahoo Sports, joined as always by Zach Crizer, also a baseball writer at Yahoo Sports. Hello.
Hello. I see you're very pumped for Dodgers Diamondbacks.
I know. We should clarify that was a specific commentary on one specific division series, which we will get into, not like a just sort of like blanket enthusiasm for the upcoming postseason series. We are currently between the wild card and the division series in what feels like a very long break because all of the wild cards were sweeps.
Sweeps.
I was at the Phillies wild card series, by which I mean the Marlins Phillies, but it was the Phillies wild card series. You were at home watching the other
doing
three.
Doing
the others. So appreciate that. And at some point, as the second set of games was winding down, I was slacking you about whether or not it was surprising or notable that they were all going to be sweeps. And
I think I was like, it's definitely notable. I don't know if it means anything long term or if there's anything behind it, but it's definitely weird.
Well, okay, so we should put some numbers to this. So this year they were all sweeps. Last year, 3 of the 4 were sweeps. If you lump in 2020, which also featured 3-game wildcards, and so many of them. Did you remember that we had 8 wildcard series in 2020?
Unfortunately, I did. It was a lot.
If you lump in the 2020 ones, 13 of 16 3-game wildcard series that have happened have all been sweeps. And I was saying there's something, why, in the regular season, this was the point that I made to you. I said, a lot. The weird thing about 3-game wildcard series feeling so weird is that most baseball series are 3 games long. And all the time, this is what I wrote about, all the time, teams lose the first one and go on to win the next 2. The Marlins did something like, I had this number 6 times this year, twice against the Phillies. They lost the first game and won the next 2. So why can't teams do it in the postseason?
I think they can. I think they have not, but I think they can. It's not even like the home team wins every time. Right. The Diamondbacks beat the Brewers on the road this year. I don't know that, even though it's 16 series, I am going to require some more evidence before I'm on the train that this is like an effect and not just some weird lucky sweep series things, but it's definitely notable. I don't know if it's important yet.
Well, even last year, the one that hasn't been a sweep in the past 2 years was the Mets Padres, and that the team that won first, the Padres, still went on to win. They just went Padres, Mets, Padres so no team has lost the first game, at least in these past 2 years, and won the series, which that does feel like we are getting into the territory of perhaps there's something in the way teams are managing their pitching maybe there is something to momentum. That feels a little bit notable because teams can win 2 games in a row. It happens a lot. It's not like once you're down 1 game, you're just completely out of it. It's very easy to win back-to-back games. In fact, 4 teams did this week. Before we get into the specifics of the wild cards, which we're not going to spend too much time on because they already happened, but we're going to talk a little bit about the teams that got eliminated. First, however, we're going to continue to, every episode, check in on the teams that were bad. We cannot escape the Mets and the Padres, but mostly the Mets. They just keep making news. New York Mets GM Billy Eppler resigned yesterday, and then they announced the resignation. It was 3 days after they officially hired David Stearns. He announced the resignation. They emailed out a statement. And then very quickly, reporting came out that the Mets are being investigated by the league for improper use of the injured list and Billy Eppler's resignation, which he said in the statement, he was like, I don't want to be a distraction to David's front office. And he did not say why he would be a distraction. And the investigation into improper use of the IL list, that was what, I guess they didn't, I guess he's tacitly admitting guilt. I don't know.
I think he's just admitting there is an investigation. And I mean, here's the thing. There's no such thing as a distraction with the Mets. They are always doing something weird. Like, this couldn't have been any more of a distraction than literally resigning. I mean,
yeah.
So anyway, that happened. I really want to know what they did with the IL to get a league investigation, because I mean, I have a guess at what it is.
Because they weren't putting Daniel Vogelback on it, even though they didn't want him to play for like 2 weeks.
Pretty sure it centers around Tim LeCastro and or Tommy Hunter. But how is this an investigation? Is there something? There must be something we don't know about, because like the Dodgers put pitchers, or at least used to put pitchers on the IL all the time with like, you know, the sniffles so they could skip a start. I mean, it just doesn't. There's no way this is the first instance of whatever the Mets did, I would think. But it's just a weird situation.
To your point about the Mets, this is like not fixing the distraction. It's like, I don't know if Billy Eppler thought by resigning we wouldn't find out what was going on, because if you resign, people are going to think something might be up, and then they're going to find out that something's up. And we're definitely talking about it now. So between when he announced the resignation and when there was reporting about the investigation, I saw some people on Twitter being like, well, this is not surprising at all. You know, you had like they brought in David Stearns over him, so he was going to resign. But I found it surprising because I thought they took such incredible pains, and by they, I mean like Steve Cohen and also Billy Eppler, throughout the year to stress that even though they were actively looking for a president of baseball operations, that this was not going to necessarily displace, or not, I mean, necessarily, that this was not going to displace Billy Eppler. He was going to stay on. Like Steve Cohen and Billy Eppler have addressed the media repeatedly throughout this year, and that's always been the message. And I just thought, like, well, they wouldn't go to such lengths to make that point if the internal messaging was like, you might want to step down.
I mean, Steve Cohen's made a point of saying Billy was staying at the press conference where David Stearns was introduced. I mean,
that's what I mean. Like they've otherwise it would have been, I mean, in part, otherwise it would have just been like very rude to Billy Eppler. Like if this whole time they were just like talking about bringing someone in who was immediately going to force him out, that would also be kind of Mets, but it would be less savory or something. So I don't know when this decision was made. I'm sure we will get more reporting. I thought about like, I should look into this. And then I was like, I'm very busy with the postseason, and other people will definitely do that because there are a lot of New York reporters and no New York teams in the postseason. Let's talk about other teams that are no longer in the postseason. The Twins swept the Blue Jays. Very exciting for the Twins. I'm glad that they didn't win one postseason game in a year where they only won one postseason game. I feel like that would have been such devastatingly incremental progress that it would have almost been worse if they had won no postseason games. So the Twins won not just one, but two, and a series. Very exciting. And now the Toronto Blue Jays are kind of like the team that gets to the postseason and then does nothing there. I didn't watch a ton of this, I have to be honest, because I was covering the Phillies series, and the way that they staggered them was such that these series were starting right, or this one was starting right as like I was getting to the ballpark. So tell me about this series. Or tell me about the Blue Jays.
The Blue Jays are just flat, man. They are just, every time anything good threatened to happen, the Blue Jays were like, just kidding, we screwed it up. Vlad Guerrero Jr. got picked off in a big moment in Game 2. John Schneider, the manager, took Jose Barrios out when he had allowed no runs in the fourth inning of the elimination game to bring in Yusei Kikuchi, which seemed like possibly a planned piggyback situation, but it's just, it didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense. It didn't work, which helped that it didn't make any sense. Like, this team felt, I compared them, I'm the idiot here, compared them to the 2022 Phillies in that they have these really good stars who you can lean on in the postseason. And then they found a way to both not lean on them, not trust Barrios, who's been their second best starter. Then the Stars screwed up. So it's just, I don't really know what is going on with that team. They also had some defensive miscues, which on the infield specifically, they got to consider moving Bo Bichette off shortstop. He's not very good at it. It's kind of throwing their infield defense off. Matt Chapman's not going to be there possibly next year. He's in his walk year. So the Blue Jays I feel like they need to shuffle something to get not their mojo back, to like find mojo.
We should ask them about why teams get swept in the wild card series, because they, in every year that there have been 3-game wild card series, the Blue Jays have been there getting swept. They lost 2-0 in the wild card series in 2020, 2-0 in the wild card series in 2022, and 2-0 in the wild card series this year. All right. Speaking of defensive miscues, the Rangers swept the Rays, and then you did a big Rays obit attempting to make sense of something that doesn't make sense, which is losing 2 games. Are the Rangers a better team than the Tampa Bay Rays?
No, but for these 2 games, they were. And I do think there's something about the length of the Rangers lineup right now that really did them a favor in this, where I don't think this will remain true going forward, but they batted Josh Young and Evan Carter, 2 rookies of varying experience levels, 8th and 9th in the order, which very quickly turned into, these are just the top of the order, but at the bottom. And they went nuts. Evan Carter didn't make an out till his last at bat of the series. Just went absolutely crazy, drove in like 7 runs. I don't know what you do about that. The Rays could not get these guys out. And then they also just like every time there was a ball to the outfield, the Rays outfielder dove and the ball went behind him. It was just like, I've never seen this many outfield balls just missed by wide margins. The other thing that doomed the Rays is the Rangers have a very obvious press here and they self-destruct button, and it's the bullpen, and the Rays just went up there hacking against the starters and never got to the bullpen until it was too late, which is just and this is what I wrote about in the story. That's how they are. That's what they do. They swing at a lot of breaking balls, and actually they're very good against breaking balls. But in this particular case, they kept swinging at Jordan Montgomery's curveball. They kept swinging at Nathan Eovaldi's splitter. It didn't work. Those were bad decisions, and they lost, even though it was I think a team that should be good overall. It was still a good lineup without Wander Franco. It was still a more effective pitching staff than the Rangers have had without their 3 aces who they lost in the course of the season. So the Rays were better than they showed in these 2 games, but that's kind of how it works. You got to be good in the moments that count.
It was surprising that they went out in this round, if only because so many of their starting pitching has gotten hurt, but they had Tyler Glasnow, they had Zach Eflin, and they have a pretty good lineup. It sort of felt like, they'll get through this round, and then suddenly we'll realize that they have not nearly enough starting pitching, but they couldn't get through this round. We're going to just keep talking about how Jordan Montgomery was the best move at the trade deadline
acquisition
for the rest of this postseason. The Diamondbacks swept the Brewers, so now Craig Counsell is available, and also the Brewers are not in the postseason. And we talked about last week about how this is like the all Zach's guys series because you love both these teams. Were you sad or were you happy? What was your emotional state? Talk to me.
I was overall happy. I think the Diamondbacks had such a fun way that they won this series. I mean, they just punched the Brewers in the mouth. They took their best shots from the starting pitching side, and they took it to Corbin Burns. I mean, it was Corbin on Corbin crime, as I said in our Slack. I mean, Corbin Carroll hit a massive home run against Corbin Burns. And Corbin Carroll, if you somehow haven't seen him yet, is like 5'8". He's a small little dude, not a big dude, just a little wiry, muscular mouse. And he just walloped a ball off of Corbin Burns. And that was kind of an emphatic show of what this Diamondbacks team can be in a short series, which is, oh, the little dude we were worried about running can also hit a 420-foot homer. So they didn't do a lot on the bases. They really just whacked the ball around off the Brewers starting pitching, and they had enough pitching to get through in game 1, and then they had Zach Gallen in game 2, and that was enough.
All right. I don't need to talk more about the Brewers. And I was at the Phillies sweeping the Marlins, and we're going to be talking about the Phillies a lot this postseason. I feel like I can't tell whether it's just because I was like literally there in Philadelphia, but it feels like the Phillies we've just assumed that they're like the same, more so than almost any other team. We're like, oh, it's the same character as last year. This is the only continuity in the postseason is the character of the Phillies. This like bare-chested himbo partying to Dancing on Your Own. Like everyone else is a team, and the Phillies are like an id. And we're going to get a lot of stories about how they are the perfect combination of still just excited to be here and also pulling from the experience they had last year. There was like a lot of talk about that already, and like the kind of like, we're the same guys, but also we know so much more. The Marlins were going to be the Phillies of this year if they won, but then they fell so very flat. Josh Bell was pretty good. He was 4 for 8 in the series. And the rest of the Marlins lineup, I don't have numbers, but I'm going to guess there was 0 for like 100. I don't know. Like there was nothing happening in the offense other than Josh Bell. And that was a problem. Luis Arraez was hurt and couldn't really run. And going into the series, it was like, well, he's going to, he had a quote in the press conference on the first day that was like, even if I only had one leg, I would be there. And that is more useful if you hit home runs, because then you don't have to run. It was it was sad to watch Luis Arraez hit into a lot of ground outs, and a lot of them would have been ground outs even if he could run. It was just not every time you get it. Like he's not batting 1,000, but just watching him hit a ground ball and then like limp up the first baseline only to get thrown out, and you're like, oh, that's the Marlins' whole offense right there. It was sad for the Marlins. Their pitching was good for a little bit, but not enough to shut down the Phillies. Bryson Stott hit a grand slam. That was now you're caught up. That's what happened, basically.
Yep.
Any questions?
Nope. I have Phillies thoughts, but we're going to talk about them later. So.
Oh, well, should we do that now? Should we move on to the division series?
We should move on to the division series, yeah.
Let's move on to the division series. I'm going to do them in the order that you or producer John or somebody put them in. Uh-huh. Starting with Twins versus Astros, the Carlos Correa Bowl.
Yes, we are reprising our series motif. Series? Is it a series of series motifs?
Yes.
We are reprising that for the division series. The weird thing about the new playoff format, I mean, I don't know if it's weird. It's a thing I notice, is that there is not a winnowing number of things anymore. It's just we have 4 wild card series, and then we have 4 division series. It's not like the NCAA tournament where the games become fewer. It's the same. So anyway, there's 4 series again. And yes, the first one is the Carlos Correa Bowl. So Twins Astros, the Astros famously in the ALCS every year. For most of that time, famously with Carlos Correa. Right. And now Carlos Correa is on the Twins.
Yes. I wrote about this for our preview and was like, Carlos Correa, who's played in like 81 postseason games, I think 79 of which have come with the Houston Astros, will now be playing the Houston Astros, who've played in a lot of postseason games recently. Fun fact that I found out when I was working on that for our preview series was that in his next game, Jose Altuve will become the 10th most career postseason games player. Ugh, yikes, said that horribly. He will have played in the 10th most postseason games in his career of any player ever, and will be the only active player on that top 10 list, which is really all you need to know about like how often the Astros have been in the not just ALDS but beyond. This is gonna be fun, I think. The Astros are always fun. The Twins feel like they were such a long shot when they hadn't won a single game, and now suddenly they feel like slightly less of a long shot because you're like, oh, all right, curses aren't real. They're just a pretty good team. They've got really good pitching, and even after having used Pablo Lopez and Sonny Gray in the first two wildcard games, they still have good pitching. There are a lot of off days in this series, this postseason, because we're no longer playing after a lockout year. Mm-hmm. I've already felt this like viscerally, the sense of like the postseason has a lot of room to breathe again. Okay, last year we both introduced the 3-game wildcard series and we're coming off of a lockout, so there were like no off days. It was just straight through, and that had such an impact on the way that teams managed like their starting pitching. And suddenly we got all these off days. So the guys you just saw start in the wild card series, they will be starting in the division series like very soon, like potentially as soon as like game 2 of the division series, depending on because which league is off after.
Yeah, we'll get to this in the Dodgers Diamondbacks, but the NL has a day off between game 1 and game 2.
Yeah,
which is very advantageous for some teams. The AL does not. They have game 1 and game 2 back to back.
But they did have 2 days off in between because all the wild card series ended and then there was a day off.
By happenstance, yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of room. What's interesting to you about this other than Carlos Correa? Like, is it, because to me that's the most interesting thing, but are there on-field things other than that are interesting to you in this?
I do think it's possible the Twins have the starting pitching advantage. Framber Valdez has not been great lately, and Justin Verlander is still Justin Verlander, but he's, not been constantly himself this year, although he's been pretty good since he went back to Houston. And the Twins really have a good stable of pitchers, not just Lopez and Gray, but whoever they choose between Bailey Ober, Joe Ryan, the entire bullpen. Kenta Maeda's down there. They just keep... I think everyone was surprised during this initial win over the Blue Jays that they kept bringing in bullpen arms who definitely are not known on the national scale, and they kept being really good. And it just felt like, the Twins are going to blow it here. And it's nope, not blowing it. So we'll see if that remains true against Yordan Alvarez, who has just murdered several underdogs in the postseason. So, I can't say I'm like expecting the Twins to rise up and slay the Astros, but there's a few reasons to think it's possible.
The one of the things that's interesting about the Twins pitching versus the Astros matchup is that what they do the best as Twins pitching is prevent home runs, which will neutralize Yordan Alvarez as a person who can change an entire series with one swing. I agree. I think narratively it'll be really interesting if the team that knocks out the Astros is the Carlos Correa-led Twins. There is a lot of I don't know that you can build a team necessarily to be good in October, but there's a lot of reason to think that Carlos Correa is really good in October. He has a lot of October experience and seems to really rise to the moment and really relish that kind of pressure. Who should a neutral observer root for? And are we overthinking it if we ask that about a series with the Astros?
Twins. Yeah,
okay.
Neutral observer should root for the Twins. That's there's no, unless you're if your favorite teams are the Yankees, Cowboys, 49ers, and I don't know who the best hockey team is, the Penguins or something, maybe you should root for the Astros, but otherwise, root for the Twins.
And we didn't even talk about Royce Lewis yet. So that's also a reason to root for the Twins. Royce Lewis is having a great postseason already after having a very rough couple of years. So he deserves nice things. Root for Royce Lewis and the Twins, who will actually win.
I still think the Astros.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be caught picking against the Astros before the ALCS until,
That's what I said in our preview. I was like, wait, am I stupid and pick against the Astros? All right. Next up, the Rangers versus the Orioles. This is where I will be headed tonight. The Rangers go to Baltimore to face the 1 seed Orioles. I think that. All right, explain to me. This is the only one where I did not understand what you wrote for the series motif. So explain to me this one.
Well, I'm gonna ask you a question first and see what your impression is. Which of these franchises made the playoffs more recently?
Oh no. Oh God, this is sorry to the Orioles. I'm sure that like every Orioles fan thinks this is the stupidest question ever because they're the one that I don't know. I know that the Rangers made it in 2016. I'm just trying to think if the Orioles made it since 2016. I think they did.
It was a trick question. They both last made it in 2016.
Okay.
So
why'd you do that to me? Making me look stupid on our podcast.
To prove the weirdness of this dynamic, they both made the playoffs in 2016 and then didn't make it till now. Yes. And they took such different ways of getting to be here again. And it felt like, this year was the year they were supposed to do it in both cases. Thus, the series motif writing on the wall. And the ways they did it were so obvious. The Orioles literally moved the walls at Camden Yards to kind of create a new generation and allow their pitchers to stop giving up homers every 10 seconds to the Yankees. The Rangers spent all the money, built a new stadium, brought in all these high-priced stars, all with the idea of like, okay, we're coming back now. This is a new thing. And they were very different paths. The Orioles had those terrible, they had a 115 loss season in there. The Rangers kept thinking they were going to compete and just being wrong for several years in a row. So I think there's both of that, and then there's another part of the wall that is interesting to me, which is homers matter a lot in the playoffs, and I actually think the Rangers are better equipped to hit home runs. They did hit a lot more home runs this year, which is partially because of Baltimore's wall situation, but they have guys who can hit the ball over the fence, and one of those guys, Adolis Garcia, is also the best thrower in the playoffs from the outfield. And I will be interested to see big outfield. Can he throw out the Orioles stretching singles into doubles? Can he hit the ball over that left field wall? So I just think there's a lot of interesting dynamics in this particular series of teams who intentionally did a lot of things to get back, and now they're back.
Okay. I have a hard time rooting for the Orioles from to me, even more than the Rays or whatever. They feel like the anti-labor team in the sense of they are touting stars who are underpaid by virtue of how long they've been in the majors, which to me feels sort of worse than, not that worse is a really blunt force value judgment, but people don't like the Rays because they managed to win by sort of finding undervalued assets and maximizing them. And as sort of frustrating as it might be from a fan experience, from a labor experience, that's you're giving opportunity to people who were not getting opportunity elsewhere and allowing them to be as productive as people who are maybe getting paid a lot more because of the shape that their production takes. But they're making major league salaries and whatever, and they're often learning how to be the best versions of themselves, and they can get paid elsewhere. The Orioles have Adley Rutschman, who should just be getting paid a lot more than he is, and that's why they're really good. And that to me feels like more of a taking advantage of the system than taking advantage of your own zagging while everybody else zags type situation.
I think that's looking at the tip of the iceberg. I mean, yes, they have Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson the same way the Astros had Carlos Correa when they came out of their rebuild. But the Orioles also have a bunch of guys who wouldn't
a rootable team, the Houston Astros.
Oh, I know, but it's not. I'm just saying it's the Orioles also have a bunch of guys who wouldn't have gotten a shot if not for their taking a chance on them. Ryan O'Hearn was DFA'd by the Royals last year and is their cleanup hitter. Cedric Mullins might not have gotten an opportunity if the Orioles weren't so bad. John Means, I mean, I don't remember where John Means was before the Orioles were bad. There's a lot of Anthony Santander was a Rule 5 pick in 2016 or something. I mean, there's guys on this team who only exist in the majors because the Orioles, certainly they were intentionally bad for a few years. But I don't find that to be drastically different than what the Rays do. It's different, but it's the same actual goal, which is to get as many guys as they can fit on a 40-man roster who are good without actually spending any money.
Right. I mean, in both cases, the Orioles and the Rays and every other team that we dislike for not spending a lot of money, it's not the players' fault, certainly.
No.
And their success is still exciting for them and still exciting for their fan base. And it doesn't detract from whether or not like the product or the players or their personalities are worth rooting for. It does just feel like I think I wrote about this like last year's draft, maybe, because that was when the Orioles had that nice little like winning streak going into the All-Star break, and then they were also taking first in the draft, and it was going to be the last draft before the draft lottery. They're really like our last team that tanked into being this good. Like it's just because you can't be tanking if everyone's trying to tank, doesn't work. 2, now we have a draft lottery which only does so much, but whatever. Someone's still going to finish last every year because that's how sports work. But
yes.
The Orioles might be our last, like, this team was built by being bad team. Like, truly, the reason they are good now is because they were bad before.
Yeah, and I will say, they nailed the draft. They nailed it. They got Adley Rutschman, they got Gunnar Henderson. Gunnar Henderson was like the 30th pick, not the first pick. And a bunch of other teams could have been in roughly similar position. The Pirates, the Royals, and they are not. So it's possible to screw this up even if you're as bad as the Orioles.
Oh, certainly. There are a lot of teams that have just not successfully rebuilt. So that's true. That's congrats to the front office staff and the scouting and the player development and all of that. And Adley Rutschman, who is very fun, and the rest of the Orioles. I feel like I'm coming down really hard on the Orioles. I don't necessarily mean that I like strongly dislike it. I do really like the Rangers though. So I have a hard time saying like who should the neutral fan root for in this series because I find the
think
Rangers
you're in the minority. Yeah, I think you're in the extreme minority. I think everyone in America will be rooting for the Orioles.
Explain that to me.
They went through so much like more devastating times of not trying. The fan base did. Obviously, the front office did that on purpose, but the fan base went through all of this, and people prefer when it's like this uprising of young, fun dudes who like splash each other with water and do the sprinkler dance than like, oh, they just brought in Corey Seager and Marcus Semien and now they're good. Like, that's not as fun. I understand the pro-laborness of it, of like, hey, look, they paid a lot for this. But if you're a neutral fan on your couch, you're going to root for the group of Orioles who all have the same haircut and look the same and like are all 22 years old.
Yeah.
That's going to be the team that people, especially I think because this series starts in Baltimore, which will be maybe not at Philly levels of nuts.
No, I am really excited
certainly
for that.
At fever pitch levels of seeing playoff baseball again.
My rooting interests are not so strongly defined that I'm not excited to see Camden Yards host a postseason game. Like, I will certainly be rooting for the Orioles to win one of the games that I am at because I think that's going to be such a fun and exciting environment. And because, unlike you, I have not seen the Splash Zone. Is that what it is? Why did I just blank on what that's called?
Yeah, I think it's called the Splash Zone.
They should name it something better, honestly. Bird Bath? They should call it the Bird Bath.
It's called the Bird Bath. It is called the Bird Bath.
Oh,
yes.
okay.
I was like, wait.
We
it is called the Bird Bath.
Got there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I have not seen the Bird Bath in person, so I will be rooting for the Orioles to win one, if not two, of their first 2 games. But you're right. There is something that we could spend a lot more time exploring in the offseason about how, like, God, there's like a Stockholm syndrome to the way that fans feel about homegrown teams. You're like, this team is only homegrown because they were bad for a while. This team had to pay for it because they weren't as bad before.
No, I mean, the Rangers were also bad. They were just
really
bad and not good at what the Orioles are good at.
But yes, you're right. I think you are absolutely correct in like fans we love to trust the process and be rewarded for that trust. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I wish if they had just, I don't know. I really turned on the Orioles at the trade deadline last year when they were all like, we're not going to acquire anyone, even though the team is winning because we're planning on winning next year. It's like, yeah, I hate that worked. I hate that they were validated in that decision.
It really worked.
Okay. To the NL.
Wait. Who's going to win?
Oh, we have to say who's going to win? I don't know.
I'll go first. I think the Orioles will win. I do think that this team has enough good plate discipline to strategically push the Rangers into their bullpen, and that feels like enough. Also, the Orioles starting pitching, which was such a question in July, has been really good lately. I think there's some concern that Kyle Bradish and Grayson Rodriguez are way beyond their previous career innings high, but I think they'll be good enough to win this series.
That's compelling. Sure. I think you're right. Probably.
Didn't you pick the Rangers?
I don't know. I forget those picks as soon as I make them. This is what I said to our editor, Amy, when we had to do picks, which is, if people knew what was going to happen, I wouldn't have a job telling people what had just happened after the games ended. I love that we don't know what's going to happen. I think that one series worth of the Rangers bullpen not blowing it is, we're pressing their luck already. You're right. I don't know why the Rays didn't realize that they should practice some plate discipline and see if they could get into the bullpen quickly. But the Orioles are a very smart team, as discussed, so they'll probably know that. Okay, this is where the pitching comes into play even more, the how you want to lay out your starting pitching because of that off day immediately after the game one. We're in the NL, Diamondbacks versus Dodgers. I keep forgetting that the Dodgers are in this postseason. Don't know why. They're very far away. They weren't in the first round. They're not either the Padres or the Giants, two teams that I felt like, are they going to get in, was an interesting question, but they're also not the Dodgers teams of yore that were like running dominant over the entire NL West from start to finish. So I just keep forgetting that they're here.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they just are kind of one and the same with playoff baseball at this point. They're always there. And it wasn't start to finish, but they did run dominant over the NL West. They won 100 games and finished like 12 games up on the Diamondbacks, who they are playing. So they're basically the same dominant team, just in a different form. Okay, I want to talk about the series motif for this. You alluded to the pitching being important in this series, and the motif I have is, do you like your pitching sunny side up or scrambled? And the reason I say it like that, the Diamondbacks are real. We have two guys, and then we will hope for the best. And that's Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly. Merrill Kelly gets to start game one because of their sweep over the Brewers. And then the Dodgers, no one knows what the Dodgers are going to do. They're going to start Clayton Kershaw for game one. He's going to go like 4 innings, and then all hell is going to break loose. I mean, they're going to do the weirdest stuff with their pitching. They're going to have like 2 guys who are theoretically starters who come in as bulk guys behind other starters. They might have a bulk guy after a reliever. They might start Lance Lynn. Who knows? But probably not. I think they're going to start Kershaw. They're going to start rookie Bobby Miller. And then they're going to like tag team Ryan Pepio with some other people. Emmett Sheehan will be involved out of the bullpen, who's a starter length. It's just going to be an unconventional pitching arrangement for a very dominant team, which we're not used to seeing.
So they're not the same Dodgers of yours, kind of my point. They're weirdly both as successful, but not as dominant, which is like a slightly less. You're right. They won a lot of games, but never felt like the best team in baseball this year. I have so little to say about this series. I don't know why. Sorry, that's like, don't put that on the podcast. I just got nothing on this series. Where do they start? LA? Finally have a West Coast. Yes. Finally, we have a West Coast game.
The every other day situation for the beginning of the series is very important because that allows Zach Gallen to start game 2 where he might not have been able to if this had been the American League. He probably wouldn't have been able to come back till game 3. So the Diamondbacks are going to get to throw their best 2 pitchers possibly twice in the series. And that's their best chance. I don't know if it's enough at all, but it gives them a much better chance than they had before.
There obviously is an advantage to getting the bye, the 1-2 seed bye that allows you to skip the wild card round because you might lose the wild card round. But with the way that the off days are, it does feel like you're not getting that same kind of you get to line up your pitching advantage. And so I wonder whether or not we'll get takes about how actually all that rest was bad if either the Dodgers or the Braves or the Orioles, or I guess the Astros, but slightly less so, get eliminated. It feels like we're setting up for that happened last year, and there was kind of is it even good to take a week and a half off? And you're right, with the way that the pitching lines up, it feels like we're mitigating some of the advantage that comes from not having to play in the wild card round, other than the fact that you don't have a 40% chance of getting eliminated, even if you're the better team. Who should a neutral observer root for? I think the Diamondbacks, because they are more fun and more new. But the Dodgers, the Dodgers lineup is a real, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, let's see him in the postseason. They'll be fun. They'll be doing fun things. I don't know. Old star-studded or new star-studded with young guys? I mean, not star-studded, but Zach Gallen and Corbin Carroll are Cy Young Rookie of the Year candidates.
I think most neutral observers will be rooting for the Diamondbacks because it's fun to see the young upstart team take down it's the same reason everyone was kind of on board with the Padres beating the Dodgers last year. It's exactly that. It's the exact same story, just with fewer superstars on big contracts. So it's probably even heightened that people will want the Diamondbacks to win. I will make the reverse case. I'll make the devil's advocate case. So Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, they are very fun. But they are here all the time, and they're probably going to continue being here all the time for the foreseeable future. I think the case to root for the Dodgers is Clayton Kershaw.
Good
because
case. Okay.
I think if they win the World Series, he might just walk away. He feels like he's the John Elway football situation where he's trying to get another championship and then take his ball and go home and ride off into the sunset. I don't know, maybe not, but that feels like the Clayton Kershaw vibe right now. And if they do win the World Series, it will be with him as the ace. I mean, They have no one else of any note yet. There are guys who are going to be really good. Bobby Miller is a really good rookie pitcher, but nobody knows who he is unless you're a big Dodgers fan. So if they win the World Series, it's probably going to be with Clayton Kershaw starting the big games, with the camera cutting to Clayton Kershaw all the time, with the trophy being handed to Clayton Kershaw and everyone expectantly listening to what he has to say at the end. So I think that's the case for the Dodgers, is maybe this is Clayton Kershaw's unadulterated full moment in the spotlight.
Man, he's been really good this year. I think we talked about this sometime in the middle of the season on the podcast, that somehow quietly, almost in part, the Dodgers' lack of starting pitching strength in some ways I feel detracted from how good Clayton Kershaw was, because I felt like they didn't have any good starting pitching, but they do. You're right. They have Clayton Kershaw. He is ace. This is going to be a tricky thing to try to explain, but his ERA plus this year on Baseball Reference, 177, 77% better than league average, which is the same as it was last year, but he threw slightly fewer innings last year. He only threw 131 innings this year, but the last time he had more innings than he had this year and a ERA plus in the 170s was 2017. This is really good. A really good, 131 innings is not a lot of innings, but it's more innings than Clayton Kershaw has thrown the last 3 years, and more productive than he's been in that time. Certainly, this would be a good note for him to go out on. You're right. This is a real, if they do win, it's like a real perfect, like, go out on top or see how long you can pitch type situation, because you could pitch again. When you have this kind of year, you could pitch again, but you could also go out on top because he's 35 and he's been pitching a really long time. And Andy McCullough's working on a book about him. So I don't know, maybe he wants to do Andy a solid and give him a conclusion to that book before it's due, presumably. I don't know what happens if Clayton Kershaw just keeps pitching. Does he ever finish the book? What happens?
Yeah, actually, Andy McCullough paid me to put that idea into the world.
Yes, right, yeah. He's like, and this should be the end. Yes. He should give a nice little speech and say, and now I'm ready for someone to release into the world a retrospective of my legacy. All right. Who will actually win?
Probably the Dodgers.
Yeah, probably the Dodgers. And then they'll lose in the CS. And we'll be like, oh no, should Clayton Kershaw come back? All right. Now for the best division series ever. The Phillies versus the Braves. And I'm not just saying that because I just watched the Phillies and all of the coverage. I was talking to someone because I was doing a podcast here in Philly yesterday, and they were like, do you feel like this is going to be the best division series ever? And I was like, it's very hard to tell because I'm surrounded by people who are all saying this is going to be the best division series ever. But that is because I put myself in Philadelphia where lots of people are saying that. But you provided new empirical evidence that this would be at least one of the best division series ever.
I did. First, I will say the series motif I have for this is just, this is the World Series we deserve. This feels like the biggest matchup that we're going to get all postseason, or at least the most compelling matchup we're going to get all postseason. And Jason Stark really provided the empirical evidence that I am going to provide now, which is he asked Stats Inc. if division rivals have ever faced off twice in a row in the playoffs, how many times has that happened? And the answer is only twice. The 2003-2004 Red Sox-Yankees series in the ALCS, which were famously pretty good. And then the 2004-2005 Cardinals-Astros series, which were exceptional series. The 2004 one got overshadowed because of the Red Sox series. And in 2005, you had the Carlos Beltran goes absolutely nuts series that came up a lot when Randy Arozarena was doing his thing in 2020. It was like, this is the first time since Carlos Beltran. It's like, yeah, it's all about that series. So those were, I will say, I probably have a specific level of respect for those series. That was really my formative baseball time. I mean, those that series of 3 years were unbelievable playoff years. And that's why it was these rematches really have a lot of narrative heft behind them. And that brings us back to this. The Phillies took out the Braves last year on their way to the World Series, and now they are going to have a chance to do it again.
Yes. Okay, so in sort of teeing this up, writing about the Phillies sweeping the wild card, I was noticing, like, the interesting thing is, this is, like, not that interesting, but they finished, last year, the Phillies finished 14 games behind the Braves, and they, like, just barely snuck into the postseason on the last day. This year, the Phillies were a little bit better, and they still finished 14 games behind the Braves because the Braves were also a little bit better. Right, it's like the division rivals are not always like I don't necessarily care that the Diamondbacks and Dodgers are in the same division. that doesn't lend much to this series, but the Phillies and Braves rivalry is like so interesting after last year because of the feeling of like the Braves, they were the reigning champions last year. They were so good. They're so much better than the Phillies. And then you're right, to get taken out by the Phillies in the DS. And then this year, the Phillies, you said going into the wild card that they're like it was the actual underdog versus the team that thought they were still the underdog. And you're right, they're not the underdog. They're the team that went to the World Series. They added Trey Turner to a lineup that already had like Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber and all that. But then they get to the Braves and you're like, oh, they kind of like, it's like, this is the only matchup where the Phillies will feel like underdogs, even though they are the team that beat the Braves last year. And that creates a lot of like narrative, emotional tension. Also, it's just two lineups that can really mash and like star starting pitching. Whether or not the Braves actually have enough starting pitching.
Maybe.
I didn't say all the pitching was good, but I'm saying Spencer Strider is kind of a star. Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola are kind of like there are pitchers to know and there are position players to know. And then also there's kind of like, well, on the Phillies, there's like new guys to know. There's really no new guys on the Braves.
The Braves have no new friends. They are all the same.
Exactly. Truly.
The thing to know about those two previous series I referenced, they were both split. They were 1-1 in those two. It was very hard to beat someone both years. So that's what the Phillies will be trying to do. And I think if they do it, we're really gonna. Maybe I wrote my like big Dave Dombrowski knows how to win in the playoffs thing too early, because if they beat the Braves again, we are gonna have a lot of teams trying to build like the Phillies. And I think, do you remember that Nick Castellanos quote about how he's better at defense in October because he just pays more attention?
Of course.
That's the Phillies' entire vibe. We just get distracted during the regular season and like only win 90 games. And then in the playoffs, they're like, oh no, we're actually just as good as the best teams in baseball. We just kind of forget. We're like ADD during the season, and then we turn it on in October.
They're very motivated by having the celebrations be in the near future. They need like a pizza party every Friday to keep them focused in the regular season.
They don't need a carrot on a stick. They need a can of Budweiser on a stick.
Exactly. They're like, we need to know that we're always at maximum 5 wins away from dousing each other in alcohol in order to stay motivated.
Yeah.
Which I actually think is something, I don't remember who, one of them in the course of the celebration, I think maybe it was like JT Realmuto was like, don't let the Phillies party. They love to have a chance to party. You give them a chance to party and they play real good. And that's true. I think there's something to that. And you're right. I think I said earlier that like the industry likes to be like, you can't know how to build for the postseason, but maybe Dave Dombrowski does. Because you do that story, and I told you, I said that if the Phillies keep winning, I want to do a story that's like a day in the life of the only beloved owner. Because I just feel like people love John Middleton, man. He just out here just throwing baseballs to the fans, just cleaning up from BP, walking around, slapping everyone on the back, having a blast, which he should. I think neutral. This is again one where I might be too biased, so you're going to have to do devil's advocate. But I think neutral observers are rooting for the Phillies to go to the World Series. Like, I think people really enjoy the distinctive character of the Phillies. And honestly, I think people wouldn't be mad at a Phillies-Astros rematch if they got to take down the Astros this time. So I think I think the neutral observer is rooting for the Phillies in the Phillies versus the Braves.
I think they are too. And I think a lot of some of it's the players, and then a lot of it is how Philly fans have turned Citizens Bank into like a football atmosphere.
Yes.
It's by far the most interesting home venue right now. The way they were singing, this went super viral. The way they were singing Bryson Stott's walk-up music to him right before he hit the grand slam. Everyone's like, whoa, this is crazy. And it's like, this is a football game. This is like most football games, but that's fine. It's better than a lot of baseball environments. It's more specific. And I hope more teams replicate this. I hope a bunch of people are up in my mentions telling me about all of these other things that people do. But really, there's not a lot of interesting baseball environments. I think the Orioles have a chance to be one. They've done some cool things with their stadium experience, but we have not seen it yet in the way the Phillies have done it for 2 years now. And I think that's a reason to root for the Phillies. So yeah, I think most people will be on the Phillies.
And the chop counts, but it's a negative. That's a unique, bad experience. No, I think it's absolutely true. The Citizens Bank Park, like it'll be after last year where there were games at Citizens Bank Park all throughout the postseason. It will be a disappointment if the teams that are in the CS and the World Series have less fanatical fan bases. It will, I think that really added something. I mean, certainly from in-person coverage, it really added something to the postseason. I should say the Astros fans have also established a real strong sense of identity. They've had a lot of chances at it. Their sense of identity is really built on costumes. Yes. But I like that. I enjoy it. It's perhaps doesn't translate as well on a broadcast. But I think this is like a, people joke about how like MLB would hate for there to be, now they can't because they were limited, like a Brewers Rays World Series or whatever, because like who would watch that? And I, as a person who only cares about baseball, I'm like, oh no, there's stories to be had there. But it's true, no offense to those fan bases, because the people who are the fans there aren't the problem. Like that would be a diminished experience from just like a neutral observer standpoint, and not just because they're like less interesting teams, but because the fans are less interesting. It's like a less compelling environment. It's not, you're not getting that moment of the opposing pitcher on the mound can't hear his own thoughts, let alone the pitch comm. Bryson Stott had a good quote after the wild card game that he won with the grand slam. Actually, they didn't need the grand slam, but he hit a grand slam and they won. And he was saying, like, I knew it was loud because I couldn't hear myself yelling to the dugout. And that's cool. So yeah, that I think, but who's going to actually win?
Well, okay, so now let's talk about the Braves, because I do think whoever wins this series is the most compelling team left in the playoffs from a World Series perspective, in that the Braves feel like just the icons of this season. That offense is so good. Ronald Acuna Jr. is going to be the thing that people bring up in 50 years when it's like, remember when they changed the rules to induce stolen bases? And everyone's going to be like, yeah, Ronald Acuna Jr. That's going to be the thing. And I do find some narrative satisfaction in the possibility that they could win the World Series, that Ronald Acuna Jr. could steal bases in the World Series in the same year that this all happened. I think the question for the Braves, I picked the Braves to win. I think it's going to be very hard, but I did pick the Braves to win. The question surrounds whether Max Fried is healthy.
Yes.
And whether any of the rest of the pitchers are okay and good. They're going to start Spencer Strider. They're going to start Max Fried. And then, at least in this series, Charlie Morton's not eligible to come back from the injured list yet. I don't know who's starting the rest of the time. Their bullpen's pretty good, but not necessarily better than the Phillies. So they're going to have to just offense their way through it. But, you know, the Braves are the single best team in like the past 100 years to do that. So
yes. The Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola both looked really good. And Aaron Nola in particular was a question kind of going into the postseason. He answered that a little bit in his final few starts of the regular season. Look, throwing 7 innings of shutout baseball one day doesn't mean that he's going to do it again, especially since that first time was against the Marlins lineup and this will be against the Braves. But not to make everything about the schedule, the Phillies are going to have Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola ready to go pretty soon. And the
games 2 and 3.
Yes. And last year, the Phillies got to Spencer Strider in the division series. And that was part of how they took down the Braves. So if they can somehow get to Spencer Strider in this first game of the division series, and then the Braves don't have Spencer Strider, and the Phillies have Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola sort of lined up to go again, then they'll be going home. Like that'll start to look unbalanced in favor of the Phillies, which is a crazy thing to say about a team that's facing the team that has like the best offense ever. I do think I don't know that we ever talked about the big Brave story that I did on the podcast, but I did a big Brave story at the end of the regular season about how they built this team. And it was like walking a fine line of ambivalence between like, how do we feel about all of these below market early career long-term extensions? And what's been interesting to me is a lot of people's read on that story was, oh, this is a reason to root for the Braves. And I'm not saying it's not, but a lot of people have been like, oh, talk about how great the Braves are based on that reporting you did. And because this gets back to something we were talking about earlier, which is like fans' interests are not necessarily anti-labor, like they're not diametrically opposed, but there are a lot of practices that contribute to something that fans like that we could be like, well, that's actually suppressing salaries. But like from a fan perspective, it's great. And keeping your entire team together for a really long time when they're good, a lot of them are either homegrown or not homegrown, but literally from that area, is really fan servicey. So from a fan perspective, there's been a lot of people who read that story as like, this is why like the Braves are the coolest main character in baseball, because like they give us this great team and then they keep them all together and they all have ties to the city and it feels really satisfying to root for. And I'm not saying it's not. So if that's how you feel, like that's a very valid reason to think that like you want to see the Braves have success and convince other teams to like replicate a model where they keep all their stars and they bring back guys who have reason to want to be in Atlanta, and they, they build a good core and then they don't ever plan on tearing it down.
Yeah, I feel like and I will say, there's only 2 deals out of the Braves' many, many deals that are notably below market. Ozzie Albies, that contract is almost a crime, but Ronald Acuna Jr.'s is way below market. Definitely, those 2 are not great for the labor side. The rest of them are pretty on point. Austin Riley, he got $200 million. It's not wildly different than what he might have been expected to get on the market eventually, and locking it in was valuable. The same Michael Harris, Spencer Strider, they signed very early, and the certainty they got in getting $70-ish million each, I believe, is probably about right. And they didn't sign away that many free agent years.
Right.
Matt Olson was only a year away from free agency when he signed, and I think he will wind up. We're going to see a very good test case for Matt Olson's contract when Pete Alonso gets to free agency and or doesn't. And I don't think Pete will beat Matt Olson's contract. So, all that's to say, the Braves are not so under market, hideously low salaries that you have to really feel bad for most of those guys. And if I were still rooting hard for a team anywhere, I would want them to be built like the Braves. I mean, that is the perfect way to bring in a bunch of superstars, have it totally work out, bring up young guys, have that totally work out, and then sign them all till kingdom come to go win the World Series over and over again. It's perfect. They're all like Matt Olson, who I will say, big difference from last year's Philly series to this year's Philly series is Matt Olson is crazy better this year. He had a down year last year. What are you going to do? Now he's hitting 52 homers and could completely swing the series by hitting a couple in these games. Atlanta native. I mean, that's the way that this team is built to both connect to the city and also stay in the city forever. So I have no issues with the way the Braves are built, other than like maybe Ozzie Albies should restructure his contract.
Yes. I feel like we're very excited about that series. Mm-hmm. We shouldn't like rank these series by excitement because they all have the potential to be really cool. But I don't know. What are you most excited to see? Not in terms of series, but in terms of like moments. Like what's a matchup or something that you're really looking forward to in this next week? Or like something that you hope happens. It doesn't even have to be like a guaranteed thing.
Well, I'll go with the kind of underrated moment first. I would like to see Corbin Carroll steal on the Dodgers and create some havoc. I don't think the Diamondbacks have the firepower to win that series, but I think Corbin Carroll could do some stuff that makes a lot of people like sit up straight and recognize how good he is. And so I'm looking forward to that. I would like to see the atmosphere in Camden Yards get a full stress test. And by stress test, I mean like the Orioles to have like a 7-run inning and send that place into a frenzy. I think that would be really fun. That's where I grew up going to baseball games. I'd love to see that particular park go nuts. And I'd like to see Braves Phillies go 5 and be close in the 9th inning.
Yeah. I would like to see Carlos Correa try to do the like my time thing, but against the Astros. I think that would be a very confusing moment. I would like to see Evan Carter, the Rangers rookie, just continue to be hot. He was incredible in that first series. He was incredible the like 2 weeks that he played in the majors before the postseason. And I think if he like goes over for the series, that'll be like right after they started calling him Little Savior. That'll be really disappointing. I almost like don't even care. Like they could get eliminated in 4 games as long as he has like, a couple of big hits. And then we get to be like, all right, cool. What a fantastic, like little story there at the end of the Rangers run. And then, right. I'm excited. I'm excited too. So I'm going to go to Baltimore for the first 2 games of the ALDS. And then I'm going to come back to Philly for the middle 2 games of that series. And I'm I think it's going to be a really good series, the Phillies-Braves, and I'm bummed to be missing any of it, although I'm pretty excited to see the Orioles environment, like you said. I am very excited to get back to Citizens Bank Park for when the Braves are in town. So I hope that series, I want that series to go 5 from a 5 games standpoint, and I want it to go 4 so that way I can see it end at Citizens Bank Park, because I think that would be cool. All right, we'll be back after those things happen to talk to you between the DS and the CS. That's all we've got for you this week. Thank you to producer John for making the podcast look and sound great. Make sure you're following both of us on all of the socials. If you've made it this far, subscribe to the podcast, the YouTube channel, leave us a 5-star review, tell a friend, and we will be back after the DS with another episode of The Bandwagon.